The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Willow Creek's dusty Main Street, sending a plume of golden dust spiraling into the late afternoon air. Winifred Thompson clutched her small valise tightly as the driver called out their arrival. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild Mustang, each beat a reminder of how far she'd traveled from Boston and how much she'd risked on this journey west. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she had made the most daring decision of her life to become a mail-order bride to a man she knew only through 6 exchanged letters. Last stop, Willow Creek, the stagecoach driver announced, jumping down to assist his passengers. Winifred smoothed her travel-worn blue dress, pinched her cheeks for color, and took a deep breath. This was it. Her future husband, a man named Harold Blackwell, had described himself as a successful rancher looking for a refined Eastern wife. He'd promised her comfort, respectability, and with time, perhaps even affection. It wasn't the romantic fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl, but after her father's death had left her penniless, practicality had replaced such fanciful notions. The driver extended his weathered hand. "Watch your step, miss." "Thank you," Winifred replied, accepting his help. Her legs felt unsteady after 3 days of constant travel. As she descended, her gaze swept the street, searching for the man who was to become her husband. Harold had described himself as tall with a distinctive red beard and said he would be waiting for her at the stage stop. The small frontier town bustled with afternoon activity. A few curious glances turned her way. A well-dressed Eastern woman was still something of a novelty in these parts. Winifred stood beside her trunk, searching the faces of those nearby, but no red-bearded man approached to claim her. After 15 minutes of anxious waiting, the stagecoach driver loaded the last of the mail and prepared to depart. "Excuse me," Winifred asked him, "is there perhaps another stage stop in town where someone might be waiting?" The driver shook his head. "This is it, madam, only stop in Willow Creek." Worry began to gnaw at her. Perhaps Harold had been delayed. "Is there a hotel where I might wait?" "The Willow Creek Inn, just up the street," the driver pointed. "Though I reckon you'd best check with the general store first. That's where folks leave messages for arrivals." With a nod of thanks, Winifred gathered her courage and made her way to Parker's General Store, a large wooden building with a wide porch. The bell jingled as she entered, drawing the attention of the proprietor and the few customers inside. "Good afternoon," she said, approaching the counter. "My name is Winifred Thompson. I've just arrived on the stage. I was supposed to meet Harold Blackwell. Has he perhaps left a message for me?" The storekeeper, a balding man with spectacles, exchanged a knowing look with a woman selecting fabric nearby. The uncomfortable silence that followed made Winifred's stomach tighten. "You'd be the mail-order bride then?" he finally asked. "Yes," she admitted, a flush creeping into her cheeks. The storekeeper reached beneath the counter and produced an envelope. "He left this for you 2 days ago." Winifred's hands trembled as she accepted the letter. She turned away slightly for privacy as she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Miss Thompson," it read in a hasty scrawl, "circumstances have changed since our correspondence. I have reconciled with a local widow and no longer require a bride from the East. I have paid for your return fare on tomorrow morning's stage. My apologies for any inconvenience. Harold Blackwell." The words blurred as tears threatened. Humiliation washed over her in a scalding wave. She had traveled over 2,000 miles, sold nearly everything she owned, only to be dismissed in a hastily written note. "Bad news, miss?" the storekeeper asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Winifred straightened her spine, determined not to show her distress to these strangers. "It seems Mr. Blackwell's circumstances have changed," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "Could you direct me to the hotel? I'll need accommodation until the next eastbound stage." The woman selecting fabric stepped closer. "Harold Blackwell is a fool," she said bluntly. "Married Sally Jenkins 3 days ago after courting her for all of 2 weeks. It's the farm she inherited he wanted, not her. Mrs. Jenkins now has a husband, and I have a return ticket to Boston," Winifred replied, attempting a brave smile. Life continues, but inside, panic was rising. She had barely enough money for a few nights' lodging. Her teaching position in Boston had been filled. Her family home had been sold to pay her father's debts. She had nowhere to return to. As the reality of her situation crashed over her, the bell above the door jingled again. A tall man in trail-worn clothes entered, the dust of the range still clinging to his denim pants and leather vest. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, his face bronzed by the sun and shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He nodded briefly to the storekeeper. "Got that order ready for the Triple T, Parker." His deep voice resonated in the small space. "Just finished putting it together this morning, Mr. Tucker. It's all boxed up in the back." The newcomer's striking blue eyes landed on Winifred, noting her traveling clothes and the letter clutched in her hand. She quickly tucked it away, embarrassed by her circumstances. "You're new to Willow Creek," he stated rather than asked. "Just arrived," she answered, avoiding further explanation. The storekeeper had no such reservations. "This here's Miss Thompson. Come all the way from Boston to marry Harold Blackwell, only to find he's gone and married Sally Jenkins instead." Winifred wanted to sink through the floorboards. "Please, that's Private Blackwell," the cowboy said, his expression darkening. "That tracks. Man never kept his word a day in his life." He studied Winifred with an intensity that made her straighten her posture defensively. Whatever he saw in her face seemed to lead him to a decision. "Luke Tucker," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "I own the Triple T Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Winifred Thompson," she replied automatically. "Miss Thompson needs a room at the hotel until tomorrow's stage," the storekeeper interjected. Luke Tucker's gaze hadn't left her face. "And then what?" "Back east," the question struck at the heart of her dilemma. "Back to what?" "To whom? I suppose so," she answered, her voice smaller than she would have liked. Luke Tucker was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. Finally, he spoke. "The Triple T needs a housekeeper. Previous one married a minor and moved to Colorado 2 months ago. I've got 3 ranch hands living in the bunkhouse and me in the main house. Place is becoming unlivable." Winifred blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Tucker? Decent pay, your own room in the house, and meals included," he continued. "It's not fancy, but it's respectable work." Her mind raced. A housekeeper position wasn't what she'd traveled west for, but it would give her time to consider her options, save some money. "What about tomorrow's stage?" she asked. "Mr. Blackwell paid for my return passage." Luke's expression hardened. "Blackwell's money is no good. If you decide to go back east, I'll pay your fare when you're ready." He looked her directly in the eye. "But you came west for a reason, Miss Thompson. Seems a shame to turn tail at the first setback." His words struck a chord. She had come west seeking a new life, a fresh start. Was she really ready to abandon that dream because one man had proven unreliable, the storekeeper, and the other customers watched this exchange with undisguised interest? Winifred was acutely aware she was standing at a crossroads, about to make a decision that would alter the course of her life, with an audience of strangers watching. "The mail-order bride was turned away by her groom," Luke stated plainly. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he added, "Then you'll stay with me, at least until you figure out what you really want." The simple offer, made without pretense or false promises, touched something in Winifred. It wasn't a proposal of marriage or even friendship, just one human being offering another a chance. "I'm a good cook," she said finally, "and I keep an orderly home." The ghost of a smile crossed Luke's face. "That's more than anyone at the Triple T can claim right now." And so, as the sun began its descent over the western horizon, Winifred Thompson made her second bold decision in as many months. She would not be returning to Boston on tomorrow's stage. Instead, she would be going to the Triple T Ranch as its new housekeeper, under the employ of a sun-weathered cowboy with serious eyes and an unexpected sense of decency. Neither of them could have possibly imagined how this pragmatic arrangement would transform both their lives in the months to come. The wagon rumbled along the rutted trail leading out of Willow Creek, each jolt and sway reminding Winifred how far she had strayed from her carefully laid plans. She sat beside Luke Tucker on the rough wooden seat, her small valise at her feet and her trunk secured in the wagon bed behind them. The afternoon had faded into evening, with the western sky painted in dramatic strokes of orange and purple. Luke handled the team of horses with easy confidence, his large hands relaxed on the reins. They had spoken little since leaving town, both seemingly lost in their own thoughts. Winifred stole occasional glances at her new employer, trying to discern what kind of man he might be. "Something on your mind, Miss Thompson?" Luke asked without turning his head, catching her in mid-observation. Heat rose to her cheeks. "I was just wondering what motivated you to offer employment to a complete stranger." Luke considered this for a moment. "Triple T needs a housekeeper." "You need a job," seemed straightforward enough. "There must be local women who would welcome such a position, none with your particular qualifications." Winifred raised an eyebrow. "And what qualifications would those be? You know nothing about me." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "You've got grit. Coming all this way alone takes courage, and you've got pride. I saw how you held yourself together in that store when anyone else might have crumbled." His assessment surprised her. "That's hardly a resume for housekeeping. Out here, character matters more than specific skills." His expression grew more serious. "Besides, I've known Harold Blackwell for years. Man's got a gift for disappointing people. Thought someone ought to show you not everyone west of the Mississippi is cut from the same cloth." Winifred absorbed this, touched by the unexpected gallantry. "That's very kind." "It's not kindness," Luke corrected, his tone matter of fact. "It's just decent. And like I said, the ranch needs someone. My men are threatening mutiny over my cooking." This drew a small smile from Winifred. "Is it truly that bad?" "Let's just say even the coyotes won't come near our kitchen scraps." As they crested a small rise, the landscape opened before them. The valley below was bathed in the golden light of sunset, revealing rolling grasslands interrupted by stands of cottonwoods and pines. In the distance, mountains rose in purple majesty against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Winifred breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles. "This is Triple T land," Luke said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. 2,000 acres. "Started with just 50 when my father claimed it 20 years ago. You've expanded considerably." "Hard work and some luck," he replied simply. "Mostly hard work." As they descended into the valley, Winifred could make out buildings in the distance, a large ranch house, a barn, and several smaller outbuildings, all nestled against the backdrop of a tree-lined creek. "Is it just you and the 3 ranch hands?" she asked. Luke nodded. "My father passed 5 years ago. Mother moved back east to live with my sister in St. Louis after he died. Couldn't stand the isolation anymore. And you, no wife?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. If Luke was offended by her directness, he didn't show it. "Never found the time," he answered, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "Ranch keeps me busy enough." As they drew closer to the homestead, Winifred could see the ranch house was substantial, 2 stories of sturdy timber construction with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Though well built, it had a neglected air about it. Curtainless windows stared out like vacant eyes, and the porch was cluttered with boots, tools, and other miscellanea of ranch life. A shaggy dog came bounding across the yard, barking enthusiastically at their approach. "That's Rusty," Luke said. "He's friendly, just loud." 3 men emerged from a smaller building to the side the bunkhouse, Winifred presumed. They stopped their conversation to stare openly as Luke brought the wagon to a halt in front of the main house. "Miss Thompson, these are my hands," Luke said as he set the brake and jumped down from the wagon. "Miguel Reyes, Tom Wilkins, and Joe Freeman." The men nodded respectfully, though their curious expressions revealed their surprise at seeing a woman in a fine traveling dress arriving at their remote ranch. "Miss Thompson will be taking over as housekeeper," Luke informed them as he came around to help her down from the wagon, "which means you'll finally get some edible food and clean shirts." "Hallelujah," the oldest of the 3 men, Tom, said with feeling. "No offense, boss, but your flapjacks could sole boots." "None taken," Luke replied, offering his hand to Winifred. She accepted his assistance, suddenly aware of how her life had changed in just a few short hours. That morning, she'd been a mail-order bride heading to meet her future husband. Now she was a housekeeper at her remote cattle ranch, surrounded by strange men, miles from town. As if sensing her unease, Luke spoke quietly. "You'll be safe here, Miss Thompson. My men are rough around the edges but honorable, and they know I won't tolerate any disrespect." There was steel in his voice as he said this last part, and Winifred saw the ranch hands straighten almost imperceptibly in response. "I appreciate that, Mr. Tucker," she replied, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than him. "But I should make it clear that I can look after myself. I didn't come west expecting to be coddled." A flicker of surprise, followed by what might have been approval, crossed Luke's face. "Fair enough. Joe, get Miss Thompson's trunk up to the east bedroom. Miguel, see to the horses." As the men moved to their assigned tasks, Luke gestured toward the house. "I should warn you, it's not in the best shape inside, been bachelor quarters for too long." "I expected as much," Winifred said, mentally preparing herself. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Tucker." "Luke," he corrected her. "Out here, formality doesn't last long, too impractical." "Then you must call me Winifred," she replied, though the informality felt strange after her proper Boston upbringing. Luke led her up the porch steps and pushed open the front door. "Welcome to the Triple T, Winifred." The interior of the ranch house confirmed Luke's warning. It wasn't squalid exactly, but showed all the signs of a home long without a woman's touch. Dust coated every surface, boots and clothing were strewn about, and dirty dishes were stacked haphazardly on the large oak table in what appeared to be the main living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while mismatched furniture was arranged with more attention to function than aesthetics. "The kitchen's through there," Luke pointed to a doorway. "Your bedroom is upstairs, first door on the right. It was my mother's sewing room, but we cleared it out and put in a bed when the last housekeeper was here. Washrooms at the end of the hall, we've got a pump inside, which is a luxury out here." Winifred took it all in, mentally cataloging the work ahead. Despite the disorder, she could see the bones of a beautiful home. The woodwork was crafted with care, and large windows offered stunning views of the surrounding landscape. "It has potential," she said diplomatically. Luke let out a short laugh. "That's generous. It's a mess, plain and simple. Nothing that can't be fixed with some effort." "You'll start tomorrow," Luke said. "Tonight I'll show you around, then you can rest. The journey must have been exhausting." It was a thoughtful gesture that touched Winifred. "Thank you." Joe entered with her trunk, huffing slightly as he carried it up the stairs. Winifred followed him to her new room, with Luke trailing behind. The east bedroom was small but pleasant, with a window overlooking the creek and mountains beyond. A narrow bed with a plain wooden frame stood against one wall, freshly made up with clean if somewhat faded linens. A washstand with a porcelain basin occupied another corner, and a simple wardrobe provided the only storage. "It's not fancy," Luke said from the doorway, as Joe set down her trunk and excused himself. "It's perfectly adequate," Winifred assured him, though it was a far cry from the spacious bedroom of her family home in Boston. But that home was gone now, sold to pay her father's debts, and this small, plain room was her reality. Luke seemed to read something in her expression. "I'll let you get settled. Supper in an hour, such as it is. Tomorrow you can take stock of the kitchen and make a list of what you need from town." After he left, Winifred sank onto the bed, finally alone with her thoughts. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave, the crushing disappointment of Harold Blackwell's rejection, the mortification of being discussed like a cautionary tale in the general store, and now her sudden change in station from prospective bride to hired help. Yet beneath the turmoil, a small spark of something like hope flickered. She had come west seeking a new beginning, and while this wasn't the one she'd planned, it was still a beginning. For the first time in her life, she would be truly independent, earning her own way. And Luke Tucker, for all his rough edges, had shown her more consideration in a few hours than Harold Blackwell had in 6 months of correspondence. Winifred rose, washed her face and hands in the basin, and changed into her second-best dress, a practical navy blue with minimal trim. If she was to be a housekeeper, she would embrace the role with dignity. She might have been turned away as a bride, but she would not be defeated by the setback. As she pinned her honey-brown hair back into a simple knot, Winifred made a silent promise to herself. This was temporary, a stepping stone. She would work hard, save her wages, and forge her own path forward, whatever that might be. When she descended the stairs an hour later, she was composed, determined, and ready to face whatever challenges her new life at the Triple T might bring. The first week at the Triple T tested every ounce of Winifred's determination and stamina. The house had been neglected far longer than she initially realized, requiring a thorough, almost military campaign against dust, grime, and disorder. She rose before dawn each day, built up the kitchen fire, and worked until well after sundown, taking breaks only for meals which she prepared for the men. Luke and his hands left the house early each morning, returning for the midday meal before heading back out to their ranch duties. They were clearly startled by the changes taking place in their home, curtains appearing on windows, floors swept and scrubbed, furniture arranged in more sensible configurations, and most notably, meals that didn't threaten to chip teeth or turn stomachs. By Friday evening, Winifred's hands were raw from scrubbing, and her back ached from hours bent over washbasins and stoves, but she felt a deep satisfaction as she surveyed the transformation. The main living area now shone with polished wood and gleaming glass. The kitchen, once a chaotic battleground of dirty pots and mysterious stains, functioned as an efficient workspace. Even the men had begun wiping their boots before entering and hanging their hats on the newly installed pegs by the door. She had just finished putting away the supper dishes when Luke entered the kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "You should rest," he said after a moment. "You've been going non-stop since you got here." Winifred wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm nearly finished for the day." "The place is unrecognizable," Luke commented, glancing around the tidy kitchen. "In a good way." "It just needed some attention," she replied modestly, though she felt a flush of pride at his acknowledgement. Luke took a sip of his coffee. "The men are planning to ride into town tomorrow for supplies. I thought you might want to go along, make that list of kitchen items you mentioned." Winifred brightened at the prospect of visiting town. "I would appreciate that, yes. Good." Luke seemed about to leave, then hesitated. "You're settling in all right. The work isn't too much." "It's certainly demanding," Winifred admitted, "but not beyond my capabilities." Luke nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've surprised me, Winifred Thompson." "How so?" Most Eastern women would have balked at the condition this place was in, would have been back on that stage to Boston without a second thought. Winifred smiled slightly. "Perhaps I'm not most Eastern women." "Clearly," Luke agreed, and there was something in his voice respect. Perhaps that warmed her more than it should have. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Rusty, the ranch dog, pushed his way through the door and came to rest his head on Winifred's apron, looking up at her with soulful eyes. "Traitor," Luke muttered to the dog. "A few scraps of bacon and your loyalty shifts completely." Winifred laughed, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Animals are excellent judges of character." "Is that so?" Luke's mouth quirked up at one corner. "And what character has Rusty judged me to have?" "Oh, he clearly respects you," Winifred replied, enjoying this moment of light conversation after days of work. "But he also thinks you could use some softening around the edges." Luke raised his eyebrows. "The dog told you this, in not so many words," she replied with mock seriousness. To her surprise, Luke laughed a genuine, warm sound that transformed his usually stern features. Winifred realized it was the first time she'd heard him truly laugh since her arrival. "Well, I can't argue with Rusty's assessment," Luke admitted. "My edges have gotten rougher these past few years." Before Winifred could respond, Miguel appeared at the kitchen door. "Boss, that bay mare's foaling. Looks like she might need help." The momentary lightness vanished from Luke's expression. "On my way." He set down his coffee cup and nodded to Winifred. "Don't wait up, this could take hours." And with that, he was gone, leaving Winifred with a strangely hollow feeling. She had caught a glimpse of a different Luke Tucker, one who could laugh and joke, and found herself curious to know more about the man beneath the stoic rancher exterior. The next morning dawned clear and bright. a perfect spring day in the high country. Winifred dressed in her most practical outfit for the trip to town, a plain brown skirt and white shirtwaist, with sturdy boots and a straw bonnet to protect her from the sun. She had just finished securing her hair when a knock came at her bedroom door. "Miss Winifred." It was Miguel's voice. "Boss says we're leaving for town in 20 minutes if you're still planning to come." "I'll be right down," she called back, gathering her list and her small coin purse. When she descended the stairs, she found only Tom waiting by the wagon, loading empty grain sacks to be refilled in town. "Morning, Miss Winifred," he greeted her cheerfully. Tom was the oldest of the hands at nearly 50, with graying hair and a perpetually sunburned nose. "Hope you're ready for a bumpy ride. Spring rains have left some mighty fine ruts in the road." "Where's Mr. Tucker?" she asked, looking around the yard. "Luke's staying behind. That foaling mare had complications, lost the foal, and she's still in a bad way." "He'll be in the barn most of the day, I expect." Disappointment flickered through Winifred, though she couldn't have explained why. "That's unfortunate about the mare. Part of ranch life," Tom said with a philosophical shrug. "Birth and death side by side." Miguel and Joe emerged from the bunkhouse, and soon all four were settled in the wagon for the journey to Willow Creek. The ranch hands were on their best behavior with Winifred present, avoiding their usual coarse language and attempting conversation that they deemed suitable for a lady's ears. "The house is looking mighty fine," Joe offered as they rattled along. He was the youngest of the three, barely 20, with an open, friendly face. "Ma would hardly believe it's the same place." "Your mother lives nearby?" Winifred asked. "Over in Prairie Junction," Joe replied. "Got 5 younger siblings keeping her busy, so I send home most of my wages." This simple revelation helped Winifred see the young man in a new light, not just a ranch hand, but a dutiful son helping to support his family. "Luke pays better than most ranchers in the territory," Miguel added. "Is why we stay, even when he is being." He searched for a polite word. "Difficult," Tom snorted. "What Miguel means is Luke works harder than any man I've ever known and expects the same from us, but he's fair and he stands by his people." "Has he always run the ranch alone?" Winifred asked, curious about the man who was now her employer. The 3 men exchanged glances. "Wasn't always alone," Tom finally said. "Was engaged about 3 years back. Pretty schoolteacher from back east, not unlike yourself." Winifred's interest was immediately piqued. "What happened?" "Couldn't handle ranch life," Joe supplied. "Too isolated, too much work. Went back east after 6 months. Left Luke harder than he was before," Miguel added quietly. "Man builds walls when he's been hurt." Winifred absorbed this information, which explained some of Luke's reserve. "It must be difficult for anyone not raised to this life." "It is," Tom agreed. "Takes a special kind of woman to thrive out here, need grit under all that gentility." The conversation moved on to other topics as they continued their journey, but Winifred found herself dwelling on what she'd learned about Luke. The image of him sitting up all night with an ailing mare, after losing the foal she'd carried, touched her. There was a gentleness beneath his rough exterior that she was beginning to glimpse. Willow Creek appeared much the same as when she'd arrived just over a week ago, though her perspective had shifted dramatically. She was no longer a mail-order bride facing rejection, but a woman with a purpose and place, temporary though it might be. As Tom pulled the wagon up in front of the general store, Winifred became aware of curious glances from townsfolk. News traveled fast in small communities, and her arrival and subsequent employment at the Triple T had clearly become a topic of interest. Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Parker, greeted her with surprise. "Miss Thompson, didn't expect to see you still in these parts." "I've taken a position as housekeeper at the Triple T Ranch," she replied with dignity. Parker's eyes widened slightly. "Have you now? Well, that's unexpected." Winifred sensed the unspoken questions and speculation behind his words but chose to ignore them. "I have a substantial order for household supplies," she said, producing her list. As Parker began gathering her items, the bell above the door jingled. Winifred turned to see a well-dressed man enter, tall, with a distinctive red beard. Her stomach tightened as she recognized Harold Blackwell, the man whose rejection had altered the course of her life. He spotted her immediately, surprise, and then discomfort crossing his features. At his side was a petite woman with auburn hair, who looked between them with evident confusion. "Miss Thompson," Blackwell said stiffly, "I thought you'd returned east." Winifred lifted her chin. "As you can see, Mr. Blackwell, I found reason to stay." The woman beside him tugged at his sleeve. "Harold, who is this?" Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. "Sally, this is Miss Thompson. She's an acquaintance from back east." Winifred almost laughed at the absurdity of the introduction. An acquaintance? She had sold everything she owned and traveled across the country to marry this man. Actually, Mrs. Blackwell, Winifred said directly to the woman, "I came west as a mail-order bride to marry your husband, but fortunately for all of us, he found you first." Sally Blackwell's face drained of color. "Harold, is this true?" Blackwell's expression darkened. "It was a misunderstanding. I wrote to end the arrangement after I had already departed Boston," Winifred pointed out, "but it's all worked out for the best. I'm now employed at the Triple T Ranch, Tucker's place." Blackwell's tone changed to one of disdain. "As what? Housekeeper," Winifred replied evenly. "How?" "Suitable," Blackwell said, his condescension obvious. Before Winifred could respond, Tom appeared at her side, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Miss Winifred, do you need any assistance with your purchases?" His presence was clearly protective, and Winifred felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Tom. Mr. Parker is just finishing our order." Blackwell took a step back, eyeing Tom warily. "We'll be going. Come, Sally." As they departed, Sally Blackwell glanced back at Winifred with an expression that mingled pity with something else, perhaps respect. "That the fella who jilted you?" Tom asked quietly when they were gone. "Yes," Winifred admitted, "though I think I had a fortunate escape." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Some men don't deserve the women they get." The encounter left Winifred shaken, but also strangely liberated. Seeing Harold Blackwell in person had dispelled any lingering regret about the failed arrangement. His callousness and dishonesty were apparent, confirming she was better off without him. By the time they finished their business in town and headed back to the Triple T, Winifred felt renewed purpose. The ranch might not be her final destination, but for now, it was where she needed to be. As the wagon crested the rise overlooking the Triple T, the setting sun bathed the ranch buildings in golden light. Despite herself, Winifred felt a small swell of something like belonging. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but as the past week had shown her, sometimes the unexpected path led to surprising destinations. The days at the Triple T fell into a rhythm as spring deepened toward summer. Winifred's initial cleaning crusade gave way to a comfortable routine of daily chores, cooking meals, washing clothes, tending to the vegetable garden she'd reclaimed from weeds behind the house. The men had adapted to her presence, remembering to remove their hats indoors and moderating their language, at least when they thought she could hear. Luke remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance, often working from before dawn until well after dusk. Only at mealtimes did they have regular interaction, and even then, he spoke primarily about ranch business with his men. Yet Winifred began to notice small changes. Fresh wildflowers would appear on the porch, conveniently timed for her to arrange them in the vase she'd cleaned and placed on the dining table. A bookshelf in the main room was cleared of dusty ledgers, making space for the few precious volumes she'd brought from Boston. And one evening, she returned from hanging laundry to find a rocking chair placed near the fireplace, salvaged from the barn and repaired. Luke explained gruffly, since every proper house needed one. These gestures, never acknowledged directly by either of them, created an unspoken language between them. Luke might maintain his verbal reserve, but his actions revealed consideration and growing respect. 6 weeks after her arrival, Winifred was kneading dough for the next day's bread when Luke entered the kitchen, his expression unusually animated. "There's a social in town tomorrow night," he said without preamble. "Barn-raising celebration for the Millers. Whole community will be there." Winifred looked up from her work, flour dusting her forearms. "That sounds lovely. Thought you might like to go," Luke continued, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Must be tedious being out here with just us for company." She smiled at his consideration. I would enjoy that, yes. Good. Luke nodded as if confirming something to himself. We'll leave after the afternoon chores. Might be late getting back. I'll prepare food to bring, Winifred offered. I understand that's customary for these gatherings. The men and I will handle the ranch work for the day, Luke added. Give you time to. Do whatever it is women do to get ready for these things. Winifred bit back a smile at his awkward phrasing. Thank you. After he left, she found herself humming as she worked a simple pleasure she hadn't indulged in for too long. The prospect of music, dancing, and conversation beyond the confines of the ranch lifted her spirits tremendously. The next day, Winifred spent the morning preparing food for the social 2 apple pies from the last of the stored winter apples and a large pan of cornbread. By mid-afternoon, she was upstairs, contemplating the limited contents of her wardrobe with a critical eye. She had brought only 3 dresses west besides her traveling outfit, a practical brown for everyday wear, the navy blue she'd worn her first night at the Triple T, and her best dress of forest green silk, saved for church and special occasions. The green dress had been her mother's last gift before she died, altered by Winifred's own hand to fit the current fashion. After bathing with special care, she arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical knot, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. The green silk rustled pleasantly as she smoothed it over her petticoats, and the color brought out the amber highlights in her hazel eyes. When she descended the stairs, she found Luke waiting in the main room, dressed in clean denims and a fresh white shirt, his usually unruly hair dampened and combed into submission. He had trimmed his beard as well, revealing more of the strong line of his jaw. He turned at the sound of her footsteps and for a moment simply stared, his expression unreadable. You look. He began, then seemed to reconsider his words. That's a fine dress. Thank you, Winifred replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. Miguel entered from outside, breaking the moment. Wagons ready, boss. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Winifred. Miss Winifred, you look beautiful. Luke shot him a look that Winifred couldn't interpret, then gestured toward the door. We should head out if we want to get there before sundown. The ride to town was quiet, with Luke seemingly absorbed in his thoughts, and Winifred enjoying the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods along the creek. She had come to appreciate the rugged beauty of this land, so different from the manicured gardens and neat streets of Boston, but magnificent in its wildness. The Miller farm was alive with activity when they arrived. Lanterns hung from posts around the newly constructed barn, and tables laden with food lined one side of the cleared area in front. A small group of musicians had set up near the barn doors, tuning fiddles and guitars in preparation for the dancing to come. Luke Tucker, As I Live and Breathe. A robust woman called out as they approached. Didn't think we'd see you at a social this century. Evening, Mrs. Miller, Luke replied, tipping his hat. Brought my housekeeper, Miss Thompson. Thought she might enjoy meeting more of the community, Mrs. Miller's shrewd eyes took in Winifred's appearance with open interest. Housekeeper, is it? Well, Miss Thompson, welcome to our little celebration. You put those dishes anywhere on the table yonder, then come let me introduce you to some civilized company. Must be desperate for conversation after weeks with just this one. She jerked her thumb at Luke, who actually looked slightly abashed. Mr. Tucker has been a perfect gentleman, Winifred said loyally. Mrs. Miller's eyebrows rose. Has he now? Wonders never cease. As promised, after Winifred deposited her food contributions, Mrs. Miller took her arm and led her through the crowd, making introductions to what seemed like half the county. Everyone was welcoming, though Winifred didn't miss the curious glances and whispered comments that followed in their wake. Her status as the mail-order bride who stayed on as Luke Tucker's housekeeper had clearly become a topic of speculation. Don't mind the gossips, Mrs. Miller advised when they paused near the punch bowl. Small towns run on talk. They'll find something new to chew on soon enough. It doesn't bother me, Winifred assured her, though it wasn't entirely true. People will think what they will. That's the spirit. Mrs. Miller nodded approvingly. Now, tell me true, how is it working for Luke? Man's got a reputation for being harder than a winter frost. Winifred considered her answer carefully. He's fair and respectful. The work is demanding but rewarding. Mrs. Miller studied her face. You know, he hasn't brought anyone to a social since that schoolteacher broke his heart and ran back east. Before Winifred could respond to this revelation, the music started up in earnest, a lively reel that immediately drew couples to the cleared space in front of the barn. Winifred watched with delight as the community came together in the energetic dance. Miss Thompson. Luke's deep voice behind her made her turn. Would you care to dance? The request surprised her. In their weeks together, Luke had never shown interest in such social activities. I'd be delighted, she answered, setting aside her punch cup. Luke led her to the edge of the dancing area, then hesitated. I should warn you, I'm out of practice. I'll follow your lead, Winifred assured him. His large hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, while the other clasped her fingers. As they joined the dance, Winifred discovered that despite his disclaimer, Luke moved with natural grace, guiding her confidently through the figures of the reel. You dance well for a man out of practice, she observed as they circled each other. A hint of a smile crossed his face. My mother insisted all her children learn, said it was essential for civilized life. A wise woman. She would have liked you, Luke said, the words seeming to surprise even himself. The dance separated them momentarily as they moved down a line of other couples, but when they came together again, something had shifted. Luke's eyes held hers with new intensity, and his hand at her waist seemed to draw her slightly closer than before. When the music ended, they remained for a moment in their final position, slightly breathless, until the clapping around them broke the spell. Luke stepped back, his expression returning to its usual reserve. Thank you for the dance, Winifred said. My pleasure, he replied formally. They were interrupted by the arrival of several ranchers eager to speak with Luke about cattle prices and grazing rights. With an apologetic glance at Winifred, he was drawn into their conversation. Left to her own devices, Winifred mingled with the other women, exchanging recipes and household tips. She was deep in conversation about preserving vegetables when she became aware of a disturbance near the refreshment tables. Harold Blackwell's voice rose above the general chatter, slurred with alcohol. Think you're too good for the rest of us now, Tucker, bringing your fancy housekeeper to show off. Winifred turned to see Blackwell swaying slightly, facing Luke with belligerent posture. Luke stood perfectly still, his expression controlled but dangerous. You're drunk, Blackwell, Luke said evenly. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. Embarrass myself, that's rich coming from you. Blackwell laughed harshly. Everyone knows why you really hired her. Couldn't find a woman any other way. A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the onlookers. Luke's hands clenched at his sides, but his voice remained steady. I won't ask again. Leave, now. Blackwell's gaze found Winifred in the crowd. Did he tell you about the school teacher? How she couldn't stand him. How the rest of his words were cut off as Luke grabbed him by the collar and marched him forcibly away from the gathering, into the shadows beyond the lantern light. Several men followed to ensure the confrontation didn't escalate further. Winifred stood frozen, mortified to be at the center of such a scene. Around her, conversations resumed with forced normalcy, but she felt the weight of curious eyes. Don't take on so, Mrs. Miller appeared at her side. Harold Blackwell has been making a fool of himself since he was old enough to talk. Nobody gives his blathering any mind. Perhaps we should leave, Winifred said quietly. Nonsense. You'll dance and enjoy yourself. Mrs. Miller's tone brooked no argument. Luke will be back once he's seen that fool off the property. Don't let Blackwell ruin your evening. True to her prediction, Luke returned some minutes later, his expression stoic but his eyes finding Winifred immediately. He crossed to her side, ignoring the speculative glances that followed him. I apologize for that unpleasantness, he said stiffly. No need, Winifred assured him. It wasn't your doing. Luke looked as if he might say more, but at that moment the musicians struck up another tune, a slower waltz this time. Instead of words, he extended his hand in silent invitation. This dance was different from the first. Luke held her closer, his movements more deliberate, almost tender. They moved together with surprising harmony, as if they'd danced this way countless times before. Whatever Blackwell was about to say, Winifred ventured, it doesn't matter to me. Luke's gaze was intense. It matters to me what you think. I think, she said carefully, that we all have pasts. What matters is who we choose to be now. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. You're an unusual woman, Winifred Thompson. Is that a compliment, Mr. Tucker? The corner of his mouth lifted. Decidedly so. They completed the dance in companionable silence, and Winifred became aware that they were drawing attention, the reserved rancher and his eastern housekeeper, moving together with unexpected grace and evident connection. For the remainder of the evening, Luke stayed close to her side, joining in conversations, fetching refreshments, and partnering her for one more dance before the festivities began to wind down. It was a side of him Winifred hadn't fully seen before, socially capable when he chose to be, even charming in his straightforward way. As they drove back to the Triple T under a canopy of brilliant stars, Winifred felt a curious contentment settle over her. The night air was cool but not cold, fragrant with sage and pine. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Luke asked, breaking a long but comfortable silence. "Very much," she replied honestly. "Thank you for suggesting it." Luke nodded, his profile strong against the starlit sky. "It was good to see you smile." "You don't do that enough." The personal observation surprised her. "I hadn't realized you noticed." "I notice more than you might think, Winifred." There was something in his tone, a warmth, an intimacy that caused her heart to beat faster. She was suddenly, intensely aware of his presence beside her on the wagon seat, of the small distance between them. "The Triple T suits you," he continued, his eyes on the road ahead. "You've brought life back to the place." "It's a good home," she said softly. Luke glanced at her then, his expression questioning. "Is that how you see it? As home?" The question caught her off guard. She had come to the Triple T as a temporary refuge, a place to gather herself after rejection. Yet somehow in these weeks it had become more. "I suppose I do," she admitted. "Though I shouldn't presume," Luke interrupted, his voice low and certain. "The house hasn't felt like a home since my mother left, not until you came." The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their simple construction. Winifred's breath caught in her throat at what remained unspoken. Before she could formulate a response, the ranch buildings came into view, their familiar silhouettes backlit by the rising moon. The moment passed, but something had changed between them. A door opened that could not easily be closed again. As Luke helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Winifred," he said, his voice husky in the darkness. "Good night, Luke," she replied, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. She carried the memory of that gaze with her as she prepared for bed, her mind replaying their dances, their conversations, the subtle shifts in their relationship that the evening had revealed. For the first time since arriving at the Triple T, Winifred allowed herself to consider a future beyond her role as housekeeper, a future that might include the quiet, complex man who had offered her shelter when she most needed it. Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams filled with music and starlight and the steady pressure of Luke's hand at her waist. Summer settled over the Triple T in waves of heat and activity. Cattle needed moving to higher pastures, fences required mending after winter damage, and the vegetable garden demanded constant attention to combat the dual challenges of drought and pests. Winifred found herself rising earlier and retiring later, the demands of ranch life consuming most of her waking hours. Yet, despite the exhaustion that often claimed her at day's end, she felt a deepening satisfaction in her work. The house had transformed under her care, becoming the warm heart of the ranch operations. The men now lingered at the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter, rather than bolting their food and retreating to the bunkhouse. Even Luke had begun to relax his vigilant schedule, occasionally joining them for an evening game of cards or simply sitting on the porch with Winifred, as twilight painted the mountains purple and gold. These quiet evenings became precious to Winifred. Sometimes they talked, Luke sharing tales of his childhood on the ranch, Winifred recounting her life in Boston before her father's illness had changed everything. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. It was during one such evening, nearly 3 months after her arrival at the Triple T, that Luke broke their comfortable silence with an unexpected question. "Do you ever regret it? Coming west?" Winifred considered the question carefully. "No," she finally answered. "Even with everything that happened, I don't regret it. Even being jilted by Blackwell," Luke pressed, a hint of disbelief in his tone. "Especially that," she replied with a small smile. "Can you imagine if I'd actually married him?" Luke's expression darkened. "Man wouldn't have deserved you." "Perhaps it worked out as it was meant to," Winifred said softly. The implication hung in the air between them. Luke turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. "Winifred," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been meaning to ask, boss." Miguel's urgent call from the direction of the barn interrupted whatever Luke had been about to say. "That stallion's kicked through his stall again." Luke's jaw tightened in frustration, but he rose immediately. "Duty calls," he said to Winifred, his expression regretful. "Don't wait up. That horse is going to be a night's work." As he strode away, Winifred tried to suppress her disappointment. Something significant had been about to happen between them. She had felt it in the air, seen it in Luke's eyes. But ranch life was unpredictable, and moments could be lost as quickly as they arose. The opportunity to resume their conversation didn't present itself in the following days. A neighbor's cattle broke through a boundary fence, requiring all hands to help sort and return the animals. Then a sudden summer storm washed out part of the road to town, leaving the ranch temporarily isolated until repairs could be made. Through it all, Winifred maintained the household with steady efficiency, but she couldn't help noticing that Luke seemed to be keeping a deliberate distance. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but the growing warmth between them had cooled to a careful formality that puzzled and hurt her. A week after the interrupted porch conversation, Winifred was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 2 riders were coming up the road to the ranch, a man and a woman, both well-dressed despite the dust of travel. As they drew closer, Winifred recognized the woman with a jolt of surprise. Elizabeth Tucker Davis, Luke's sister from St. Louis, had visited once before during Winifred's tenure at the Triple T. The man beside her was presumably her husband, whom Winifred had not yet met. Luke emerged from the barn at the sound of visitors, his expression shifting from wariness to pleasure as he recognized his sister. "Lizzie," he called, striding to meet the approaching riders. "This is unexpected." Elizabeth dismounted with practiced grace, embracing her brother warmly. "Surprise visits are the best kind. You can't prepare your usual gruff welcome." She turned to Winifred with a genuine smile. "Miss Thompson, how lovely to see you again. The house looks wonderful. I scarcely recognize it." "Thank you, Mrs. Davis," Winifred replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's a pleasure to see you too." "Please, Elizabeth," the other woman insisted, "and this is my husband, James." The distinguished-looking gentleman tipped his hat. "Miss Thompson, my wife has spoken highly of you." Luke, who had been quietly observing this exchange, finally spoke. "What brings you all the way from St. Louis? Is Mother well?" "Mother is fine," Elizabeth assured him. "But we have news that couldn't wait for a letter." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "James has been appointed as the American consul to Paris. We leave in 6 weeks." Luke's expression registered surprise, then genuine happiness for his sister. "Paris, that's remarkable, Lizzie." "Congratulations to you both." "There's more," Elizabeth continued. "Mother is coming with us. She's always dreamed of seeing Europe, and now she'll have her chance." Winifred watched as Luke absorbed this information. "That's wonderful for her," he said sincerely. "She deserves the adventure." "We'll be gone at least 2 years," James added. "Perhaps longer." Something unspoken passed between the siblings, a question in Elizabeth's eyes, an answer in Luke's slight nod. "You must be exhausted from your journey," Luke said, practical concerns taking precedence. "Come inside. Winifred keeps a pot of coffee ready, and I'm sure we can rustle up some food." As the group moved toward the house, Winifred fell into step beside Elizabeth, who linked their arms companionably. "I'm so glad to find you still here," Luke's sister said quietly. When I visited in spring, I worried you might not stay. The Triple T can be an intimidating place for someone not raised to it. It grows on you, Winifred replied with a smile. Elizabeth studied her face thoughtfully. Yes, I can see that it has. Inside, Winifred busied herself with hospitality, serving coffee, preparing a light meal, making the guests comfortable. Luke and James fell into conversation about international affairs and business opportunities, while Elizabeth moved to help Winifred in the kitchen despite her protests. I insist, Elizabeth said firmly. It gives us a chance to talk privately. Once they were alone, she continued in a lower voice. My brother seems different, less rigid. Winifred concentrated on slicing bread. Ranch work has been good this season, less worry about drought than last year. It's not the ranch, Elizabeth said shrewdly. It's you. Winifred looked up in surprise. I'm just the housekeeper. Elizabeth's expression was kind but knowing. Luke has never been one to confide his feelings, even to family, but a sister notices things. He's lighter when you're near. His eyes follow you when you move around a room. Heat rose to Winifred's cheeks. You're mistaken. Am I? Elizabeth challenged gently. What about your feelings? Is the Triple T just employment to you? The direct question caught Winifred off guard. She had been so careful to maintain professional boundaries, to not acknowledge the growing emotions that Luke stirred in her. To have them called out so plainly was disconcerting. It's complicated, she finally admitted. I came west for a different life than this. Life rarely gives us what we planned for, Elizabeth observed. Sometimes it gives us something better if we're brave enough to recognize it. Before Winifred could respond, Luke appeared in the kitchen doorway. Need any help in here? Just finishing, Winifred answered, grateful for the interruption. Throughout the meal that followed, Winifred was conscious of Elizabeth's thoughtful gaze moving between her and Luke, observing their interactions with sisterly interest. If Luke noticed this scrutiny, he gave no sign of it, maintaining easy conversation about ranch operations and family connections. As the afternoon waned, Elizabeth announced that she and James would stay the night before continuing to their next destination. I'll help Winifred prepare the guest room, she offered, rising from the table. Once upstairs and out of earshot of the men, Elizabeth returned to their previous conversation. I apologize if I was too forward earlier, she said as they changed linens on the guest bed. It's just that I care deeply for my brother's happiness. Winifred smoothed the fresh pillowcase. No apology necessary. Your concern for him is admirable. With Mother leaving for Europe, Luke will be truly alone, Elizabeth continued. The Triple T has always been his life, but a life needs more than just work to sustain it. Luke is stronger than most, Winifred observed, and he has his men, the community. Elizabeth shook her head. It's not the same as family, as connection. She paused, then added carefully, when my husband proposed to me, Luke told me something I've never forgotten. He said, the brave choice and the right choice are often the same thing. The words resonated with Winifred, touching something deep within her. Your brother is a wise man. When he chooses to be, Elizabeth agreed with a smile. Unfortunately, he can also be stubborn, reserved, and infuriatingly slow to act on his own happiness. The frankness of this assessment startled a laugh from Winifred. You sound like a true sister. The truest, Elizabeth confirmed. Which is why I'll say one more thing, then leave the matter alone. Whatever is growing between you and my brother, and don't bother denying it again, it deserves a chance. Life out here is too uncertain, too precious, to waste time on hesitation. Winifred was saved from having to respond by a call from downstairs. The moment passed, but Elizabeth's words remained with Winifred as the evening progressed, through dinner and the conversation that followed, until the household finally retired for the night. In the solitude of her room, Winifred confronted the truth she had been avoiding. Her feelings for Luke had grown far beyond appropriate bounds for employee and employer. She had come to admire his integrity, his quiet strength, his dedication to the land and people under his care. More than that, she had come to care for him deeply, perhaps even love him, though she scarcely dared use the word, even in her own thoughts. But what of his feelings? There had been moments in town at the social, on the porch in the evenings when she thought she glimpsed similar emotions in him. Yet he maintained his distance, never crossing the invisible line between them. Elizabeth's visit had stirred waters that Winifred had been carefully keeping still. Now that they were disturbed, she wasn't sure they could ever be calm again. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Winifred rose early, determined to provide a hearty breakfast for the household before the Davises departed. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard voices from the main room, Luke and his sister, speaking in low but intense tones. "You're a fool if you let her go," Elizabeth was saying. "I've seen how you look at her." "It's not that simple, Lizzie," Luke's voice was strained. "It's exactly that simple. You care for her, she clearly cares for you. What's stopping you?" A long pause followed. "She deserves better than this life, better than me." "That should be her choice, don't you think?" Elizabeth pressed. "Or are you still punishing yourself for what happened with Caroline?" "This has nothing to do with Caroline," Luke replied sharply. "Doesn't it? You've kept everyone at arm's length since she left. Winifred is the first person who's managed to breach those walls, and now you're pulling back because you're afraid." "I'm trying to be honorable," Luke insisted. "She came here for refuge, not to be pursued by her employer." "Honor without courage is just another word for cowardice," Elizabeth said, her tone softening. "Talk to her, Luke, before it's too late." Winifred retreated silently back up the stairs, her heart pounding. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but having heard, she couldn't unhear. Luke cared for her, Elizabeth seemed certain of it, and his own words suggested as much. But he was holding back, bound by some misplaced sense of honor or lingering wound from his past. By the time she came downstairs again, making her presence known with deliberate footsteps, the siblings had moved to different parts of the house. Breakfast proceeded with forced normalcy, though Winifred was acutely conscious of the undercurrents flowing beneath the mundane conversation. After the meal, as the Davises prepared to depart, Elizabeth embraced Winifred warmly. "Remember what I said," she whispered. "The brave choice." Then they were gone, leaving a strange vacuum in their wake. Luke immediately busied himself with ranch tasks, avoiding the house and, by extension, Winifred. She went about her normal routine, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over everything she had learned. That evening, Luke did not join her on the porch as had become their custom. The empty chair beside her seemed to mock her newfound awareness, highlighting what was missing rather than what remained. As darkness fell, Winifred made a decision. If Luke would not broach the subject that lay between them, then she would have to find the courage to do so herself. The next morning brought unexpected activity to the Triple T. A buyer from Denver had arrived to discuss purchasing a significant portion of Luke's herd, and the negotiation consumed most of the day. Winifred caught only glimpses of Luke as he showed the buyer around the property, their heads bent in serious discussion. It was late afternoon by the time the business was concluded, the buyer departing with a promise to return in 2 weeks with men to drive the purchased cattle to the railhead. Winifred was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Luke finally entered the house. "That went well," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "Got a better price than I expected." "That's wonderful," Winifred replied, trying to gauge his mood. He seemed more relaxed than he had in days, perhaps due to the successful business transaction. "It means we can make those improvements to the north pasture before winter," Luke continued. "Maybe even start work on expanding the house next spring." Winifred's hands stilled over the dough she was kneading. "Expanding the house," Luke nodded, seemingly unaware of her reaction. "Been thinking about it for a while. Need a proper office, another bedroom or two." He glanced around the kitchen. "Could make this space bigger too, give you more room to work." The casual way he included her in these future plans made Winifred's heart skip. Was this his way of indicating she had a place in that future? Or was he simply being considerate of his housekeeper's needs? "That sounds like a significant undertaking," she said carefully. "The Triple T is growing," Luke replied. "The house should grow with it." There was an opening in his words, a space where Winifred could have asked about her own place in these plans. But courage failed her at the crucial moment, and instead, she simply nodded and returned to her work. Luke lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, making small talk about the cattle sale and the upcoming harvest. There was an undercurrent to his presence, as if he too was searching for words to bridge the gap between them. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Luke cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask you something, Winifred." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "Would you?" He began, then seemed to reconsider. "That is, I was wondering if you might like to ride out to Eagle Point tomorrow. It's my favorite spot on the ranch. Thought you might enjoy seeing it." It wasn't what she had hoped he might ask, but it was an invitation, nonetheless a shared experience beyond their daily routine. "I'd like that very much," she replied, smiling. "Good." Luke nodded, seemingly relieved. "We'll go after breakfast if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." As he left the kitchen, Winifred felt a cautious hope blossoming. Perhaps tomorrow, away from the ranch house and its established patterns, they might finally speak of what remained unspoken between them. Morning brought clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for their excursion to Eagle Point. Winifred dressed in her most practical outfit for riding, a divided skirt she had sewn specifically for ranch activities, and a simple blouse. She braided her hair tightly to keep it from tangling in the wind. Luke was waiting by the barn when she emerged from the house, 2 horses already saddled. His own mount was a powerful bay gelding, while for her he had chosen a steady mare named Daisy that Winifred had ridden before on shorter journeys around the ranch. "Ready?" he asked, offering her a hand up to the saddle. "As I'll ever be," she replied with a smile, settling herself comfortably. Though she had grown more confident on horseback during her months at the Triple T, she was still a novice compared to Luke, who seemed to have been born to the saddle. They set off at an easy pace, following a well-worn trail that led away from the ranch buildings and up into the rolling foothills. The morning air was crisp and fragrant with pine and sage, and birds called from the scattered trees that dotted the landscape. "Eagle Point is about 5 miles from here," Luke explained as they rode. "My father discovered it when he first claimed this land. Said he knew right then that this valley would be home." "What made it so special to him?" Winifred asked. Luke's expression softened with memory. "You'll see when we get there. It's not something that can be properly described." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses, hooves creating a soothing backdrop to their journey. Occasionally, Luke would point out features of the landscape, a particular tree that had survived a lightning strike, the subtle signs of game trails, the distant outline of mountains that marked the boundary of Triple T land. Winifred found herself struck anew by his deep connection to this place, the intimate knowledge that came from a lifetime lived in harmony with the land. It was so different from her own upbringing in a crowded city, where nature was something tamed and contained in parks and gardens. "You love it here," she observed, "every rock and tree." Luke glanced at her, a hint of surprise in his expression. "I do," he acknowledged. "It's more than property to me, it's part of who I am." "I understand that now," Winifred said. "When I first arrived, I saw only the harshness, the isolation, the endless work. But now I see the beauty too, the freedom." Something in Luke's posture relaxed at her words, as if she had passed some unspoken test. "Most people never get past seeing the hardships," he said quietly. "They miss what makes it worthwhile." The trail began to climb more steeply as they approached their destination. Luke led the way, occasionally looking back to ensure Winifred was managing the terrain. Finally, they crested a rise and emerged onto a rocky promontory that jutted out from the hillside. "Eagle Point," Luke announced, dismounting and securing his horse to a scrubby pine. Winifred followed suit, accepting his help down from the saddle. As she turned to face the view, her breath caught in her throat. The entire valley spread before them in panoramic splendor. The ranch buildings looked like a child's toys from this height, nestled beside the silver ribbon of the creek. Beyond, the land rolled away in waves of green and gold, all the way to the distant mountains that stood like sentinels on the horizon. An eagle soared in lazy circles above the valley, riding thermals with effortless grace. "Oh," Winifred breathed, moving to the edge of the outcropping. "It's magnificent." Luke came to stand beside her, his own gaze taking in the vista with familiar appreciation. "This is Triple T," he said simply. "All of it, from the creek to those far mountains. What my father built, what I've added to, what I hope to pass on someday." There was something in his voice, a question, a yearning that made Winifred turn to look at him. His profile was strong against the blue sky, his expression unguarded in a way she rarely witnessed. "To your children," she said softly, completing the thought he had left unspoken. Luke nodded, still gazing out at the land. "If I'm fortunate enough to have them." The moment stretched between them, laden with possibility. Winifred gathered her courage, remembering Elizabeth's words, the brave choice. "Luke," she began, turning fully to face him. "There's something I need to say to you." Now he looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "I'm listening. These past months at the Triple T have changed me," she said. "I came west seeking security, a practical arrangement. What I found instead was something I never expected." Luke's expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes never left hers. "And what was that?" "A home," Winifred said simply. "Not just a place to live, but a true home, and more than that." She took a deep breath. "I found feelings I wasn't looking for, feelings for you." The words hung in the clear mountain air between them. Luke's posture had gone very still, his breathing shallow. "Winifred," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your employer. I offered you shelter when you had nowhere else to go. I can't take advantage. Is that what you think this is?" She interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "That you've somehow coerced my affection. Luke, I'm not a woman easily led. What I feel for you has grown naturally, day by day, through seeing who you truly are, your integrity, your kindness, your strength." Luke took a step closer to her, close enough that she could see the varied shades of blue in his eyes, the way the sun had left fine lines at their corners. "I've tried to keep my distance," he admitted, "to be honorable, but these feelings, they've become harder to deny with each passing day." Hope bloomed in Winifred's chest. "Then don't deny them," she said softly. "Not anymore." For a moment, Luke seemed to struggle with himself, years of reserve battling against the emotions so clearly visible in his eyes. Then, with a sound that was half sigh and half surrender, he reached for her. His hand cradled her cheek with surprising gentleness, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I never expected you," he murmured. "Never thought I'd find someone who could understand this life, who could see it as I do." "I do see it," Winifred assured him, her own hand coming up to cover his. "And I see you, Luke Tucker." Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Luke lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was tender at first, almost reverent, but deepened as Winifred responded with all the feelings she had kept contained for so long. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the social," he confessed. Winifred smiled. "I've wanted you to do that since the night of the social." Luke laughed softly, the sound of it filling Winifred with joy. Then his expression grew more serious. "I need you to be certain, Winifred. This life isn't easy. The isolation, the constant work, the unpredictability of nature, it breaks some people." "I know what this life demands," she replied steadily. "I've lived it these past months, and yes, it's challenging, but it's also rewarding in ways I never imagined possible. I don't want easy, Luke, I want real." He studied her face, seeming to search for any hint of doubt. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Then I have something to ask you." Taking a step back, Luke reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the sunlight. It was a ring, a simple gold band set with a single small diamond. "This was my grandmother's," he said, holding it between them. "My father gave it to my mother when he asked her to share his life and help him build something lasting. I'm asking you the same question now." Winifred's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "Luke." "Winifred Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you make the Triple T your home, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife? Will you build this legacy with me, share its burdens and its joys?" Tears blurred Winifred's vision, but she blinked them away, wanting to see his face clearly in this moment. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with certainty. "Yes to all of it." With hands that trembled slightly, Luke slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the small diamond catching the sunlight and throwing rainbow prisms across their joined hands. "The mail-order bride was turned away by her groom," Luke said softly, echoing the words he had spoken the day they met. The cowboy said, "Then you'll stay with me." His smile was tender as he added, "Forever, if I have any say in it." Winifred rose on her tiptoes to kiss him again, her heart full to overflowing. Against all odds and expectations, she had found her place in this wild, beautiful land, not through the practical arrangement she had initially sought, but through the unexpected love of a man as steady and true as the mountains that watched over his domain. As they stood together on Eagle Point, the vast landscape spread before them like a promise. Winifred knew with absolute certainty that she had made the brave choice. And as Luke had once told his sister, the brave choice and the right choice were often one and the same. The wedding of Luke Tucker and Winifred Thompson took place 6 weeks later, on a golden autumn day when the aspen leaves shimmered like coins in the afternoon light. The ceremony was held on the front porch of the Triple T Ranch house, which had been transformed for the occasion with garlands of pine boughs and late-blooming wildflowers. The entire community of Willow Creek turned out for the celebration, along with Luke's mother and sister, who had delayed their departure for Europe to attend. Mrs. Tucker, a dignified woman with Luke's blue eyes and direct gaze, had embraced Winifred warmly upon meeting her, whispering, "Thank you for bringing my son back to himself." Winifred wore a gown of ivory satin that Elizabeth had helped her select during a special trip to Denver. It was simpler than the elaborate fashions popular in the East, but its clean lines and delicate lace trim suited both the occasion and Winifred's natural elegance. Luke, standing tall and straight in a new black suit, watched with undisguised wonder as she approached him on Tom's arm, the older ranch hand having offered to stand in for Winifred's deceased father. The expression on Luke's face in that moment, a mixture of love, pride, and barely contained joy, was one Winifred would carry in her heart for all the years to come. The minister, a circuit rider who served the scattered communities of the territory, spoke of commitment, partnership, and the special blessings of a union built on mutual respect and genuine affection. As Winifred and Luke exchanged their vows, Rusty the ranch dog lay contentedly at their feet, as if offering his own approval of the proceedings. "I, Luke, take you, Winifred, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Luke said, his deep voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Winifred's voice was clear and unwavering as she repeated the ancient promises, her eyes never leaving Luke's face. When they exchanged rings his grandmother's for her, a plain gold band for him, their hands were steady, their purpose certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Luke's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Winifred felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from tree branches to illuminate the festivities. There was music from local fiddlers, dancing on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion, and food enough to feed the entire county. Mrs. Miller, who had appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, made sure everything ran smoothly, from the serving of the 3-tiered cake to the traditional games that kept the younger guests entertained. "You've done well for yourself, girl," she told Winifred during a quiet moment. And for him too. Never seen Luke Tucker smile so much in all the years I've known him. It was true. Luke moved through the celebration with an ease and openness that surprised even those who had known him longest. He danced not only with Winifred, but with his mother, his sister, and several of the older women of the community who had watched him grow from boy to man. Harold Blackwell and his wife were notably absent from the festivities, though they had received an invitation. Winifred found she didn't mind in the slightest. The man who had once rejected her had inadvertently given her the greatest gift, the chance to find where she truly belonged. As the evening waned and guests began to depart, Luke found Winifred sitting on the porch steps, taking a moment's rest from the whirl of activity. "Happy, Mrs. Tucker?" he asked, settling beside her, The name still sent a thrill through her. Completely, she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. Though I suspect I'll be even happier when we have our home to ourselves again. Luke's arm slipped around her waist. Soon, he promised. Mother and Lizzie leave tomorrow. The men are staying in town tonight out of consideration. His eyes held a warmth that made Winifred's pulse quicken. Just us, as it should be. The last guests departed just after midnight, leaving only family behind. Elizabeth hugged Winifred tightly before retiring to the guest room with her husband. I told you the brave choice was the right one, she whispered. Welcome to the family, sister. Mrs. Tucker, who would be staying in Luke's old room for her final night at the Triple T, pressed a small package into Winifred's hands. For your new beginning, she said with a smile that held both happiness and a touch of wistfulness. I'm so pleased to leave my son in such capable hands. Later, alone in what was now their bedroom, Winifred's small room having been exchanged for the master suite that Luke had previously occupied, they opened Mrs. Tucker's gift together. It was a hand-stitched quilt, pieced in a pattern of stars against a background of deep blue. She made this, Luke said, running his fingers over the intricate stitching. I remember her working on it last winter, but she never said what it was for. It's beautiful, Winifred marveled, admiring the craftsmanship. She must have known, Luke said softly. Mothers often do. They spread the quilt over their bed, a tangible blessing from the woman who had raised Luke to be the man he was. A connection to the past as they began their future together. That night, as they lay together beneath the star-patterned quilt, Winifred whispered, I love you, Luke Tucker. The words still new enough to hold a special wonder. Luke's arms tightened around her. And I love you, Winifred Tucker, more than I have words to express. Words, as it turned out, were unnecessary. In the quiet darkness of their shared room, in the home that had become truly theirs, they found other ways to communicate the depth of their feelings. The seasons turned, as they always do. Autumn's gold gave way to winter's white, then to spring's vibrant green. The Triple T thrived under their joint stewardship, with Luke's practical knowledge of ranching complemented by Winifred's organizational skills and fresh perspective. As promised, they began expanding the house when the weather warmed, adding the office Luke needed for ranch business and enlarging the kitchen to Winifred's specifications. They worked side by side whenever possible, from the planning stages through to hammering nails and painting walls. Never thought I'd see the boss with a paintbrush, Miguel commented one afternoon, watching Luke apply a coat of white to the new kitchen walls. Marriage changes a man, Tom replied with a knowing smile, usually for the better. Luke, overhearing, merely grinned and continued his work. The contentment he had found with Winifred was evident in everything he did, from the more frequent laughter that now echoed through the ranch house to the small gestures of affection he no longer hesitated to show. Letters arrived regularly from Europe, where Mrs. Tucker and the Davises were enjoying their diplomatic posting in Paris. Each one contained news of their adventures, inquiries about ranch operations, and increasingly, hints about the hope for a grandchild in the not-too-distant future. Mother's not one for subtlety, is she? Luke observed after reading one particularly pointed missive. Winifred smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Perhaps we should put her mind at ease in our next letter. Luke's head snapped up, his expression changing from amusement to shock to overwhelming joy in the space of a heartbeat. Winifred, are you saying? Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday when I was in town, she said, her own joy bubbling over. We're expecting a child in the winter. Luke was across the room in an instant, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of delight that brought Rusty running from his spot by the fire. A child, he breathed, his hand joining hers over the place where their baby grew. Our child. The first of several, I hope, Winifred said, laughing as he swung her in a careful circle. As many as you want, Luke promised fervently. We'll fill this house with children with laughter. That evening they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Rusty dozed at their feet, occasionally twitching in doggy dreams. I was thinking, Luke said, his hand entwined with Winifred's. If it's a boy, perhaps we could name him after my father, William. William Tucker, Winifred tested the name. It has a good, strong sound, and if it's a girl, Luke considered for a moment. What was your mother's name? Elizabeth, Winifred replied. Though we already have one of those in the family. True, Luke acknowledged. What about Grace? It was my grandmother's name, the one whose ring you wear. Grace Tucker, Winifred nodded. I like it very much. They fell into comfortable silence, contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future rich with promise, with the legacy they would build together. The Triple T would pass to another generation, and another after that, carrying forward the dream that had begun with Luke's father and would continue through their children. As dusk deepened into night, Luke drew Winifred closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Do you ever think about that day? He asked quietly. When you arrived on the stage and Blackwell wasn't there, Winifred nodded. Sometimes. It seemed like the end of all my hopes at the time. And now, she turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the evening sky. Now I know it was just the beginning. The real beginning. Luke's smile was tender as he traced the curve of her cheek. The mail-order bride was turned away by her groom, he recited, the words that had once been a statement of fact now transformed into the opening line of their love story. The cowboy said, "Then you'll stay with me." The best words I ever heard, Winifred murmured, leaning into his embrace. And as night settled fully over the Triple T, wrapping the ranch in its peaceful darkness, Winifred and Luke Tucker sat together on the porch of the home they had created, bound by love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings, looking toward a future bright with shared dreams and abiding hope. In the quiet moments of that spring evening, with new life growing within her and the steady presence of the man she loved beside her, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had always truly sought, not just security or comfort, but belonging. A place to put down roots, to flourish, to love and be loved in return. The journey west had led her not to the practical arrangement she had planned, but to something far more valuable, a love born of mutual respect and genuine connection, a partnership that would weather whatever challenges the untamed frontier might bring. And as the stars emerged one by one above the Triple T, Winifred sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for unanswered letters, changed plans, and the courage to embrace the unexpected path that had led her home.